A young student stumbles upon a roadside shrine and unknowingly awakens a vengeful spirit that clings to her every step. From that moment, her nights are filled with shadows pressing at the window, her days weighed down by exhaustion as the ghost pursues her without rest. Breathless runs and the sound of footsteps in the dark strip her strength, leaving her body weak and her mind fractured. Just as the phantom closes in, its cold presence wrapping around her, a mysterious man appears. Standing firm against the darkness, he confronts the spirit, offering the girl a fragile hope in the midst of despair. My name is Amanda, a journalism student who never thought a roadside shrine would ruin my sense of safety. On a lonely stretch outside Baton Rouge, the shrine stood half hidden by tall grass, its cross tilted as if the earth itself had grown tired of holding it up. Melted candles clung to the dirt, and stuffed animals, weathered from rain, leaned lifelessly against the wood. Mark, my lab partner, leaned against the hood of the car, teasing that people only stopped here to scare themselves. I adjusted my glasses, sweat sticking to my short hair, and told him we should leave, yet my legs stayed frozen. Something about the place pulled at me, like a whisper behind my ears. I reached toward the cross, and the air went bitter cold, sharper than winter. A shadow shifted behind it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. When headlights from passing cars swept across my bedroom wall, I saw him. He stood in the corner, waxy skin streaked with black lines, his eyes hollow pits where something wet kept seeping down like tar. My breath fogged even inside my blanket, every inhale tasting faintly of smoke. I tried to laugh at myself, tried to text Rachel to distract me, but I deleted the words before sending. At class the next day, Mark poked fun at the bags under my eyes. Rachel, kinder than him, pressed her hand to my shoulder and asked if I was sick. I lied and said exams were crushing me. What else could I say that a burned man followed me from a roadside shrine? His presence lingered, making every hallway colder. On the third night, he came for me on the highway. Mark rode beside me, scrolling his phone, while I focused on the empty stretch of road. The headlights struck him suddenly, his figure in the middle of the lane, burned flesh glowing faint under the light. I yanked the wheel, heart banging in my chest, but instead of hitting him, the car went through him. My glasses fogged instantly, and I felt invisible fingers clamp over my hands on the steering wheel. The vehicle swerved, spinning across gravel until it stopped inches from the ditch. Mark shouted, shaken, demanding to know what I was doing, but I couldn't answer. The burned man was already there again, his eyes locked on me, black streaks dripping from them onto the pavement, spreading like stains across the night. I stumbled out of the car, legs unsteady. He followed, moving faster than smoke should move, arms stretching unnaturally long, reaching to clutch me. I ran down the roadside, shoes slipping on loose stones, lungs aching, tears stinging my eyes. Rachel had followed us in her own car and pulled over, screaming my name, but the howl of the phantom drowned her out. The shrine rose ahead, candles still burning though no one had touched them for weeks. I felt him pushing me toward it, trapping me against the light. His body swelled taller, face hollow but furious, each step shaking the ground beneath me. The stench of smoke and wet ash clung to my skin. My chest locked tight, and I realized he wanted more than fear. He wanted me as part of him. Then he appeared. A man tall and steady stepped from the mist, his long coat brushing against the dirt. His blue eyes glowed faintly, not harsh but calm, like a tide rolling forward. He raised one arm, shielding me from the ghost. The burned spirit screeched, the sound cracking like thunder, yet the stranger didn't flinch. He stood firm, and the weight of his presence forced the phantom backward, dragging it into the shadows of the shrine. Mark grabbed my shoulder. Rachel clung to my arm, both too afraid to speak. I leaned against the cross, body trembling, every breath shallow. Gratitude swelled inside me, but so did dread. The shrine still burned its candles, untouched by weather, and I knew something had bound itself to me. Even saved, I understood it would follow. It already had my name. A young woman struggles after surviving a cursed shrine, haunted not only by restless nights, but also by strange shifts in her friends. Small signs, a tilted frame, a moving key, a delayed reflection, grow into undeniable terror when shadows creep into familiar places. Mark begins acting strangely, as if something dark presses through him, while Rachel senses the danger but cannot explain it. In the library, the spirit returns, twisting reality until panic consumes them. Just as the girl faces losing everything, the mysterious man reappears, confronting the phantom with calm strength. His warning leaves her shaken, realizing the curse has chosen her. I used to believe fear was a quick thing, like the jolt you get from a jump scare or a sudden noise in the night. What happened after the shrine showed me fear was slower than that. It seeps, it lingers, and it finds ways to follow you even when you think you've stepped away. Mark tried to cheer me up by suggesting coffee at a crowded cafe, while Rachel swore fresh air at the park would help me sleep. Both meant well, but nothing drowned out the weight pressing against me. I laughed at their plans, pretended I was fine, yet inside every step felt rehearsed under someone else's gaze. The man who saved me at the shrine hadn't given his name. He appeared, he stood against the spirit, and then he was gone before I could ask who he was. Still, I remembered the steady calm in his eyes, the way the air bent around him, forcing the darkness back. That memory carried me through the week. Even as nights turned restless and the scent of smoke curled faintly in my room, I wondered if I was going mad or if he was waiting somewhere close. Mark joked that I'd developed a crush on my mysterious rescuer. Rachel told him to shut up, but I caught myself staring out windows, searching for blue eyes in the dark. The signs started quietly, a picture frame tilted by itself. Keys slid across the table when no one touched them. My reflection in the mirror blinked half a second later than I did. I brushed it all off, told myself exhaustion was playing tricks. But one evening, while working on a campus assignment, I caught Mark staring at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. His face looked the same, but his eyes seemed too dark, too steady, almost like the shadow from the shrine had slipped inside him. When I asked what was wrong, he snapped out of it and laughed nervously. Rachel noticed too, but neither of us said a word. That night, I dreamt of the shrine again. The cross leaned, the candles burned without flame, and the charred figure waited, motionless. Behind him, another shadow rose, taller, more human, wearing a face I knew. Mark's face. I woke gasping, sweat plastering my shirt, the echo of a laugh still ringing in my ears. I told myself not to be ridiculous, yet dread coiled in my stomach the next morning when Mark insisted on driving me to class. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles pale, and every red light reflected emptiness in his eyes. Rachel sat in the back, whispering prayers under her breath. The silence in that car was heavier than any scream. By evening, I couldn't shake it anymore. The three of us went to the library to study, but the air felt wrong, too still between the shelves. Lights flickered overhead, pages rustled though no one turned them. At the far end of the aisle, I saw him again. The burned man, waiting with black tears streaking his face. Rachel clutched my arm, whispering that she saw nothing. Mark stood frozen, and when his head tilted in the same jagged way as the phantom, my chest caved with panic. I backed away, pulling Rachel with me, my mind racing to call for the stranger who had once appeared. My voice caught, useless in the silence. Then he came. The man in the dark coat stepped out from between the shelves, calm as though he belonged there, his eyes locked onto Mark, not unkind but firm, as if peeling something away from him. Mark collapsed to the ground, gasping, while the burned figure writhed against a force it couldn't overcome. Rachel cried softly, clutching my sleeve, and I stood frozen, watching the stranger extend his hand, palm open, not striking but steady. The spirit shrieked and dissolved into shadow, sucked back through the cracks of the floor like smoke disappearing under a door. When it was gone, the silence rang louder than noise. Mark sat up trembling, eyes clearer but wet with shame. He whispered that something had been inside him, twisting his thoughts, using his body as a doorway. Rachel helped him up, though her hands shook. I wanted to thank the man, to ask him why this thing kept chasing me, why it singled me out. But before words formed, he looked at me with quiet gravity and spoke only once. Be careful where you stand. Not all places want to let you leave. He turned and vanished down the aisle, coat brushing the floor, leaving the scent of cold air behind. We stayed there long after, unsure what was safe anymore. Mark apologized again and again, though none of us could be sure it was really over. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his words. Maybe fear wasn't about being chased. Maybe it was about knowing the ground beneath you could shift at any time, that a moment of curiosity could chain you to something unseen. The shrine hadn't just marked me. It had chosen me. And the worst part was, I didn't know why. I used to think silence was a comfort, a rare gift in a noisy world, but lately silence has turned into something else. It lingers in the corners of my apartment like an uninvited guest, heavy and restless, filling the air until I catch myself listening too closely. Tonight, the lights flickered while I made tea, and I laughed it off even though my hands shook more than the spoon in the cup. Rachel had stopped by earlier, trying to distract me with stories from work, but she left quickly when the temperature dropped without reason. I noticed her eyes darting toward the hallway as if she felt something too. Mark called just after she left, his voice uneven, almost distant, telling me not to stay alone. He didn't explain why, only that he'd be over soon, though his words carried a weight that pressed harder than his usual concern. By the time he arrived, the rooms felt smaller, the walls too close, the shadows too thick. I tried to act casual, offering him tea, but my smile cracked when the cabinet door opened on its own. He froze, and I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. He told me to sit while he checked each room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was searching for more than creaking pipes or drafts. His steps slowed near the mirror in the hallway, and I saw his face pale when his reflection didn't move with him. I felt my chest tighten, and every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Rachel called, her voice urgent, begging me not to stay there. Before I could answer, the call cut off, replaced by static that hissed through the phone like breathing. Mark returned, his face unreadable, and he whispered that we weren't alone. I wanted to scream at him for stating the obvious, but fear stole the words from my throat. The air grew dense, pressing against my skin as if the apartment itself was alive. The lights dimmed, and shapes stirred in the corners, bending the space into something unrecognizable. I felt cold hands brush my arm, though nothing was there, and the sound of footsteps circled us, slow and deliberate. My heartbeat drowned out everything until a soft knock echoed from the bedroom door, though we had left it wide open. Mark stepped closer to me, shielding me without saying a word, and that's when I saw him. The man who had saved me once before. He didn't appear dramatic or loud, just steady, like he had walked out of the dark to claim his place in this chaos. His eyes held mine for a brief second, enough to quiet the panic spiraling inside me. Then he turned, facing the shifting shadows that clawed at the room, his presence like a barrier I didn't know I needed. The sound around us warped, like whispers tangled with wind, and the mirror in the hall began to ripple as though it were water. I couldn't look away, even when fear told me to, watching faces I didn't recognize press against the glass from the other side. Mark staggered back, his hand over his mouth, while Rachel's voice broke through on speaker, urging us to get out before it was too late. But the man lifted his hand slightly, not in command but as a quiet reassurance, and the chaos stilled. The temperature rose, the lights steadied, and for a moment it felt like waking from a fever dream. Yet the mirror remained, distorted and alive, humming with something that hadn't been silenced but only paused. He looked at me then, a weight in his expression that said more than words could, and told me softly that the curse hadn't finished with me. My stomach sank, realizing this wasn't over, that survival tonight only meant facing what was coming next. When the air finally cleared, Mark sat heavily on the couch, his face buried in his hands. Rachel burst through the door minutes later, pale and shaking, relief and fear mixing in her eyes. I wanted to believe it was done, that we had endured the worst, but deep down, I knew better. I had seen the way the mirror pulsed like a heartbeat, and I couldn't ignore the warning in the man's voice. Later, when I lay in bed with the lights on, the silence returned. It wasn't peaceful, not anymore. It stretched too long, waiting, pressing against the edges of the room like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I told myself to sleep, to pretend it was just another night, but in the corner of the mirror, I caught the faintest ripple. And I knew that whatever had chosen me had no plans of letting go. I never thought the old library on the edge of town would unsettle me. I'd spent hours there as a child, tucked between rows of dusty shelves while my mother searched for books, yet stepping inside last week felt different. The place carried a weight that clung to my skin, as if the air itself was keeping secrets. Mark had convinced me to go with him, saying it might help distract me from the strange nights I'd been having. Rachel joined too, her arms crossed, unimpressed by the idea of wasting an afternoon with creaking floors and fading wallpaper. I pretended not to care, though every step deeper into the building felt like walking into a memory that wasn't mine. The silence pressed against my ears, and somewhere between the shelves, I swore I heard someone breathing. I brushed it off, forcing a laugh, but Rachel caught my expression and frowned. She asked if I was all right, and I said yes, even though my hands shook. Mark was already further ahead, his flashlight catching on something reflective. I followed reluctantly, and the three of us found ourselves before a door I didn't remember from childhood. Its handle was cold, unnaturally so, and when Mark pushed it open, the air seemed to spill out, stale and heavy. Inside was a narrow room with tall mirrors leaning against the walls. Some were cracked, others cloudy with age, but each reflected more than they should have. My own image blinked a second too late, and Rachel gasped when she noticed hers smiling faintly without her. I felt my stomach turn, but before we could step back, the door clicked shut behind us. The sound was soft yet final, like the room had claimed us. Panic rose quickly. Mark rattled the handle to no use. Rachel pressed against the glass as though it might lead somewhere else, and I just stood frozen, staring at my reflection as it tilted its head independently. My breath came short, and a pressure built in the room, tightening around us like invisible hands. Shadows slid across the mirrors, dark shapes that didn't match our movements, and she cried out, clutching my arm, and in that instant, a figure appeared in the far corner. He wasn't a reflection, not part of the mirror's tricks, but someone real standing in the dim light. The man I had seen before, the one who seemed to appear when all hope fractured. His calmness struck me harder than the fear, grounding me when everything else wanted me to collapse. He stepped between us and the shifting mirrors, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The room stirred, glass surfaces trembling, shadows writhing as though resisting him. Mark shouted, his voice raw with fear, while Rachel buried her face against my shoulder. The man raised his hand, not with force, but with a steady quietness, and the mirrors groaned under an unseen strain. One by one, the false reflections faltered, their movements collapsing until only our true images remained, shaken but still. The door opened on its own then, swinging wide to reveal the library's dim corridor. We rushed out, Rachel pulling me, Mark stumbling behind. I turned at the threshold, and the man still stood there, watching the mirrors settle back into silence. His gaze met mine briefly, filled with warning but also a strange gentleness, and then the door closed as if he'd never been. Outside, the three of us sat on the library steps, too shaken to speak. Mark's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette he didn't even smoke. Rachel pressed her palms against her eyes, and I stared at the ground, my heart still racing. I wanted to believe it was over, that leaving the room meant leaving the horror behind, but deep down, I knew it had followed us. I could feel it in the way the shadows lengthened even under the afternoon sun, stretching too far, reaching too close. That night, lying in bed, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. It lingered a second too long before moving with me, and I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders. I thought of the man, his presence steady like an anchor, but also of his silence. He hadn't promised safety, only given us another chance to breathe. And as the room cooled around me, I realized chances don't last forever. I used to walk home late without thinking twice, cutting through quiet streets where porch lights glowed faintly and dogs barked from behind fences. It felt safe in that ordinary way small towns usually do, until the night I noticed the silence following me was heavier than my own footsteps. The world seemed to pause between breaths, and every shadow on the pavement felt deliberate. Rachel was the first to notice I had been restless. She teased me about my sleepless nights, but I couldn't explain how I woke up gasping, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of my bed. Mark brushed it off, insisting stress was making me paranoid, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I wanted to believe them both, but the unease clung to me, stubborn as smoke. It happened again after class when we stopped by the abandoned community hall. The place had been boarded up for years, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with dust. Mark thought it would be fun to sneak inside. Rachel rolled her eyes but followed anyway. And I went along because pretending not to be afraid felt easier than admitting I was. The moment we stepped in, I regretted it. The air inside was cold and carried a faint hum, like whispers caught in the walls. The three of us wandered through empty rooms littered with broken chairs and faded posters. I tried to stay close, but something tugged at my attention, a sound like faint tapping in the distance. When I turned, a figure stood at the end of the corridor. It wasn't Mark or Rachel, though both were near me. The figure didn't move, didn't even breathe, just lingered long enough for my skin to prickle before it vanished into the dark. I froze, my throat tightening, but Rachel only laughed nervously when I told her. Mark frowned and said we should leave, but the hallway ahead stretched longer than it should have. No matter how many steps we took, the exit seemed to retreat farther, pulling us deeper into the building. My chest constricted, and I felt the ground tilt under my feet. The shadows bent around us, curling along the walls like they were alive. Rachel gripped my arm tightly, her face pale. Mark swore he saw someone brush past him, though there was no one there. We huddled close, hearts racing, when the air suddenly grew denser, pressing against our lungs. I heard faint laughter then, light and echoing, though not from any of us. Panic surged, and I stumbled backward into a cracked door that swung open behind me. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down into blackness. That was when he appeared again. The man I had seen before, the one who always surfaced when fear reached its breaking point. He didn't speak, just stepped into view as though he had been waiting all along. His presence cut through the chaos, steady and unshaken, his gaze fixed on something beyond the shadows clawing toward us. Without lifting a hand or raising his voice, the tension in the air seemed to recoil, the laughter dimming into silence. Rachel pulled me forward, Mark following reluctantly, and somehow the corridor shortened, the exit door finally within reach. The moment we stumbled outside, the night air felt sharper, cleaner, though my legs nearly buckled from the rush of release. Behind us, the building loomed as if nothing had happened, its windows dull, its door sealed tight. I knew better, though. Something had seen us, touched us, and let us go. We sat in silence on the curb, too shaken to speak. Rachel's grip on my hand hadn't loosened. Mark stared blankly at the asphalt, and I just tried to steady my breathing. I thought about the man again, his calmness almost unnatural, but I felt a strange comfort in knowing he had been there. He didn't save us outright, but he gave us a way out when everything else closed in. That night, lying in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and listened for sounds I didn't want to hear. My chest still carried the echo of that pressure, and my eyes drifted to the corner of the room where shadows collected thicker than they should. I wanted to convince myself it was over, that leaving the hall meant leaving it all behind. But deep down, I knew. Once something chooses to notice you, it doesn't forget. And the thought of being remembered by what I saw filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. The night it all began was so ordinary, I almost laughed thinking back on it. I had gone with Rachel and Mark to a small gathering at a friend's house. Nothing wild, just music humming in the background and people talking too loudly in the kitchen. We left later than planned, the streets mostly empty, the air cooler than expected. And I remember thinking how the quiet felt heavier than usual, as if the whole town had gone to sleep at once. Rachel walked a few steps ahead, scrolling through her phone, while Mark kept pace with me. It should have been an easy walk back, but I noticed movement near the street lamps, the way the light bent slightly as if someone had passed just outside its glow. I brushed it off, told myself it was a trick of tired eyes, until I realized the same distortion kept following us block after block. My heart raced faster with every step, and I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't as alone as we thought. We cut through the old playground to save time, the one kids used years ago, but now stood rusting, swings swaying without wind. That's when I saw her. A woman in pale clothes standing on the other side of the fence, her face hidden in shadow, though there was no reason for it. Rachel called out, thinking she was lost, but the figure didn't move. Mark stiffened beside me, his jaw tight, and I felt my stomach twist. By the time I blinked, she was closer, impossibly so, and the air around us grew dense. Rachel's phone flickered and died in her hand, even though it had been fully charged. The slide behind us groaned as if weight pressed against it, though nothing was there. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. Mark reached for my arm, urging me forward. Yet the path out of the playground seemed longer than before, stretching unnaturally. Shadows bled across the ground, curling toward our feet like water spilling from an unseen source. I could hear a voice then, faint, almost melodic, weaving through my thoughts. It wasn't words I recognized, but it clawed at me, making my chest tighten. Rachel clung to my sleeve, her eyes wide with terror, whispering that she felt someone breathing just over her shoulder. I turned and saw nothing but air trembling, like heat above asphalt, except it was cold, piercingly so. I thought I might collapse right there until I saw him again. He emerged not from the dark, but as if the dark gave way to him. The same man who had appeared before, calm and unhurried, his gaze steady while mine darted everywhere. He didn't shout or gesture, but his presence alone seemed to push back against the suffocating weight around us. The shadows stilled, the voice in my head faltered, and the pale figure by the fence froze, as if bound by something beyond my understanding. Mark urged us toward the street, his grip firm on my wrist, while Rachel stumbled beside me, her breaths shallow. The path that had stretched impossibly long now felt normal again, the distance collapsing until the open road welcomed us back. The man didn't follow, didn't even glance at us, only held his ground as the figure dissolved into the night air. It was as if his very existence was enough to draw a line between what belonged here and what didn't. We didn't speak until we reached Rachel's porch. Mark sat down heavily on the steps, face pale, while Rachel muttered about never walking that way again. I stayed silent, too aware of the way my skin still prickled, the way my ears strained for sounds that weren't there. I kept thinking of the woman by the fence, how wrong her stillness felt, and how the man had stood unshaken while everything in me unraveled. That night, I lay awake, staring at the corner of my room, half expecting the pale figure to return, half hoping the man would. I told myself it was over, that the playground belonged to the past now, but I couldn't shake the feeling we had stepped into something waiting just beneath the surface. A young student stumbles upon a roadside shrine and unknowingly awakens a vengeful spirit that clings to her every step. From that moment, her nights are filled with shadows pressing at the window, her days weighed down by exhaustion as the ghost pursues her without rest. Breathless runs and the sound of footsteps in the dark strip her strength, leaving her body weak and her mind fractured. Just as the phantom closes in, its cold presence wrapping around her, a mysterious man appears. Standing firm against the darkness, he confronts the spirit, offering the girl a fragile hope in the midst of despair. My name is Amanda, a journalism student who never thought a roadside shrine would ruin my sense of safety. On a lonely stretch outside Baton Rouge, the shrine stood half hidden by tall grass, its cross tilted as if the earth itself had grown tired of holding it up. Melted candles clung to the dirt, and stuffed animals, weathered from rain, leaned lifelessly against the wood. Mark, my lab partner, leaned against the hood of the car, teasing that people only stopped here to scare themselves. I adjusted my glasses, sweat sticking to my short hair, and told him we should leave, yet my legs stayed frozen. Something about the place pulled at me, like a whisper behind my ears. I reached toward the cross, and the air went bitter cold, sharper than winter. A shadow shifted behind it. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. When headlights from passing cars swept across my bedroom wall, I saw him. He stood in the corner, waxy skin streaked with black lines, his eyes hollow pits where something wet kept seeping down like tar. My breath fogged even inside my blanket, every inhale tasting faintly of smoke. I tried to laugh at myself, tried to text Rachel to distract me, but I deleted the words before sending. At class the next day, Mark poked fun at the bags under my eyes. Rachel, kinder than him, pressed her hand to my shoulder and asked if I was sick. I lied and said exams were crushing me. What else could I say that a burned man followed me from a roadside shrine? His presence lingered, making every hallway colder. On the third night, he came for me on the highway. Mark rode beside me, scrolling his phone, while I focused on the empty stretch of road. The headlights struck him suddenly, his figure in the middle of the lane, burned flesh glowing faint under the light. I yanked the wheel, heart banging in my chest, but instead of hitting him, the car went through him. My glasses fogged instantly, and I felt invisible fingers clamp over my hands on the steering wheel. The vehicle swerved, spinning across gravel until it stopped inches from the ditch. Mark shouted, shaken, demanding to know what I was doing, but I couldn't answer. The burned man was already there again, his eyes locked on me, black streaks dripping from them onto the pavement, spreading like stains across the night. I stumbled out of the car, legs unsteady. He followed, moving faster than smoke should move, arms stretching unnaturally long, reaching to clutch me. I ran down the roadside, shoes slipping on loose stones, lungs aching, tears stinging my eyes. Rachel had followed us in her own car and pulled over, screaming my name, but the howl of the phantom drowned her out. The shrine rose ahead, candles still burning, though no one had touched them for weeks. I felt him pushing me toward it, trapping me against the light. His body swelled taller, face hollow but furious, each step shaking the ground beneath me. The stench of smoke and wet ash clung to my skin. My chest locked tight, and I realized he wanted more than fear. He wanted me as part of him. Then he appeared. A man tall and steady stepped from the mist, his long coat brushing against the dirt. His blue eyes glowed faintly, not harsh but calm, like a tide rolling forward. He raised one arm, shielding me from the ghost. The burned spirit screeched, the sound cracking like thunder, yet the stranger didn't flinch. He stood firm, and the weight of his presence forced the phantom backward, dragging it into the shadows of the shrine. Mark grabbed my shoulder. Rachel clung to my arm, both too afraid to speak. I leaned against the cross, body trembling, every breath shallow. Gratitude swelled inside me, but so did dread. The shrine still burned its candles, untouched by weather, and I knew something had bound itself to me. Even saved, I understood it would follow. It already had my name. A young woman struggles after surviving a cursed shrine, haunted not only by restless nights, but also by strange shifts in her friends. Small signs, a tilted frame, a moving key, a delayed reflection, grow into undeniable terror when shadows creep into familiar places. Mark begins acting strangely, as if something dark presses through him, while Rachel senses the danger but cannot explain it. In the library, the spirit returns, twisting reality until panic consumes them. Just as the girl faces losing everything, the mysterious man reappears, confronting the phantom with calm strength. His warning leaves her shaken, realizing the curse has chosen her. I used to believe fear was a quick thing, like the jolt you get from a jump scare or a sudden noise in the night. What happened after the shrine showed me fear was slower than that. It seeps, it lingers, and it finds ways to follow you even when you think you've stepped away. Mark tried to cheer me up by suggesting coffee at a crowded cafe, while Rachel swore fresh air at the park would help me sleep. Both meant well, but nothing drowned out the weight pressing against me. I laughed at their plans, pretended I was fine, yet inside every step felt rehearsed under someone else's gaze. The man who saved me at the shrine hadn't given his name. He appeared, he stood against the spirit, and then he was gone before I could ask who he was. Still, I remembered the steady calm in his eyes, the way the air bent around him, forcing the darkness back. That memory carried me through the week. Even as nights turned restless and the scent of smoke curled faintly in my room, I wondered if I was going mad or if he was waiting somewhere close. Mark joked that I'd developed a crush on my mysterious rescuer. Rachel told him to shut up, but I caught myself staring out windows, searching for blue eyes in the dark. The signs started quietly. A picture frame tilted by itself. Keys slid across the table when no one touched them. My reflection in the mirror blinked half a second later than I did. I brushed it all off, told myself exhaustion was playing tricks. But one evening, while working on a campus assignment, I caught Mark staring at me in a way that made my stomach tighten. His face looked the same, but his eyes seemed too dark, too steady, almost like the shadow from the shrine had slipped inside him. When I asked what was wrong, he snapped out of it and laughed nervously. Rachel noticed too, but neither of us said a word. That night, I dreamt of the shrine again. The cross leaned, the candles burned without flame, and the charred figure waited, motionless. Behind him, another shadow rose, taller, more human, wearing a face I knew. Mark's face. I woke gasping, sweat plastering my shirt, the echo of a laugh still ringing in my ears. I told myself not to be ridiculous, yet dread coiled in my stomach the next morning when Mark insisted on driving me to class. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles pale, and every red light reflected emptiness in his eyes. Rachel sat in the back, whispering prayers under her breath. The silence in that car was heavier than any scream. By evening, I couldn't shake it anymore. The three of us went to the library to study, but the air felt wrong, too still between the shelves. Lights flickered overhead, pages rustled though no one turned them. At the far end of the aisle, I saw him again. The burned man, waiting with black tears streaking his face. Rachel clutched my arm, whispering that she saw nothing. Mark stood frozen, and when his head tilted in the same jagged way as the phantom, my chest caved with panic. I backed away, pulling Rachel with me, my mind racing to call for the stranger who had once appeared. My voice caught, useless in the silence. Then he came. The man in the dark coat stepped out from between the shelves, calm as though he belonged there, his eyes locked onto Mark, not unkind but firm, as if peeling something away from him. Mark collapsed to the ground, gasping, while the burned figure writhed against a force it couldn't overcome. Rachel cried softly, clutching my sleeve, and I stood frozen, watching the stranger extend his hand, palm open, not striking but steady. The spirit shrieked and dissolved into shadow, sucked back through the cracks of the floor like smoke disappearing under a door. When it was gone, the silence rang louder than noise. Mark sat up trembling, eyes clearer but wet with shame. He whispered that something had been inside him, twisting his thoughts, using his body as a doorway. Rachel helped him up, though her hands shook. I wanted to thank the man, to ask him why this thing kept chasing me, why it singled me out. But before words formed, he looked at me with quiet gravity and spoke only once. Be careful where you stand. Not all places want to let you leave. He turned and vanished down the aisle, coat brushing the floor, leaving the scent of cold air behind. We stayed there long after, unsure what was safe anymore. Mark apologized again and again, though none of us could be sure it was really over. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his words. Maybe fear wasn't about being chased. Maybe it was about knowing the ground beneath you could shift at any time, that a moment of curiosity could chain you to something unseen. The shrine hadn't just marked me. It had chosen me. And the worst part was, I didn't know why. I used to think silence was a comfort, a rare gift in a noisy world, but lately silence has turned into something else. It lingers in the corners of my apartment like an uninvited guest, heavy and restless, filling the air until I catch myself listening too closely. Tonight, the lights flickered while I made tea, and I laughed it off, even though my hands shook more than the spoon in the cup. Rachel had stopped by earlier, trying to distract me with stories from work, but she left quickly when the temperature dropped without reason. I noticed her eyes darting toward the hallway, as if she felt something too. Mark called just after she left, his voice uneven, almost distant, telling me not to stay alone. He didn't explain why, only that he'd be over soon, though his words carried a weight that pressed harder than his usual concern. By the time he arrived, the rooms felt smaller, the walls too close, the shadows too thick. I tried to act casual, offering him tea, but my smile cracked when the cabinet door opened on its own. He froze, and I knew I wasn't imagining it anymore. He told me to sit while he checked each room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was searching for more than creaking pipes or drafts. His steps slowed near the mirror in the hallway, and I saw his face pale when his reflection didn't move with him. I felt my chest tighten, and every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Rachel called, her voice urgent, begging me not to stay there. Before I could answer, the call cut off, replaced by static that hissed through the phone like breathing. Mark returned, his face unreadable, and he whispered that we weren't alone. I wanted to scream at him for stating the obvious, but fear stole the words from my throat. The air grew dense, pressing against my skin as if the apartment itself was alive. The lights dimmed, and shapes stirred in the corners, bending the space into something unrecognizable. I felt cold hands brush my arm, though nothing was there, and the sound of footsteps circled us, slow and deliberate. My heartbeat drowned out everything until a soft knock echoed from the bedroom door, though we had left it wide open. Mark stepped closer to me, shielding me without saying a word, and that's when I saw him. The man who had saved me once before. He didn't appear dramatic or loud, just steady, like he had walked out of the dark to claim his place in this chaos. His eyes held mine for a brief second, enough to quiet the panic spiraling inside me. Then he turned, facing the shifting shadows that clawed at the room, his presence like a barrier I didn't know I needed. The sound around us warped, like whispers tangled with wind, and the mirror in the hall began to ripple as though it were water. I couldn't look away, even when fear told me to, watching faces I didn't recognize press against the glass from the other side. Mark staggered back, his hand over his mouth, while Rachel's voice broke through on speaker, urging us to get out before it was too late. But the man lifted his hand slightly, not in command but as a quiet reassurance, and the chaos stilled. The temperature rose, the lights steadied, and for a moment it felt like waking from a fever dream. Yet the mirror remained, distorted and alive, humming with something that hadn't been silenced but only paused. He looked at me then, a weight in his expression that said more than words could, and told me softly that the curse hadn't finished with me. My stomach sank, realizing this wasn't over, that survival tonight only meant facing what was coming next. When the air finally cleared, Mark sat heavily on the couch, his face buried in his hands. Rachel burst through the door minutes later, pale and shaking, relief and fear mixing in her eyes. I wanted to believe it was done, that we had endured the worst, but deep down, I knew better. I had seen the way the mirror pulsed like a heartbeat, and I couldn't ignore the warning in the man's voice. Later, when I lay in bed with the lights on, the silence returned. It wasn't peaceful, not anymore. It stretched too long, waiting, pressing against the edges of the room like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I told myself to sleep, to pretend it was just another night, but in the corner of the mirror, I caught the faintest ripple. And I knew that whatever had chosen me had no plans of letting go. I never thought the old library on the edge of town would unsettle me. I'd spent hours there as a child, tucked between rows of dusty shelves while my mother searched for books, yet stepping inside last week felt different. The place carried a weight that clung to my skin, as if the air itself was keeping secrets. Mark had convinced me to go with him, saying it might help distract me from the strange nights I'd been having. Rachel joined too, her arms crossed, unimpressed by the idea of wasting an afternoon with creaking floors and fading wallpaper. I pretended not to care, though every step deeper into the building felt like walking into a memory that wasn't mine. The silence pressed against my ears, and somewhere between the shelves, I swore I heard someone breathing. I brushed it off, forcing a laugh, but Rachel caught my expression and frowned. She asked if I was all right, and I said yes, even though my hands shook. Mark was already further ahead, his flashlight catching on something reflective. I followed reluctantly, and the three of us found ourselves before a door I didn't remember from childhood. Its handle was cold, unnaturally so, and when Mark pushed it open, the air seemed to spill out, stale and heavy. Inside was a narrow room with tall mirrors leaning against the walls. Some were cracked, others cloudy with age, but each reflected more than they should have. My own image blinked a second too late, and Rachel gasped when she noticed hers smiling faintly without her. I felt my stomach turn, but before we could step back, the door clicked shut behind us. The sound was soft yet final, like the room had claimed us. Panic rose quickly. Mark rattled the handle to no use. Rachel pressed against the glass as though it might lead somewhere else, and I just stood frozen, staring at my reflection as it tilted its head independently. My breath came short, and a pressure built in the room, tightening around us like invisible hands. Shadows slid across the mirrors, dark shapes that didn't match our movements, and she cried out, clutching my arm, and in that instant, a figure appeared in the far corner. He wasn't a reflection, not part of the mirror's tricks, but someone real standing in the dim light. The man I had seen before, the one who seemed to appear when all hope fractured. His calmness struck me harder than the fear, grounding me when everything else wanted me to collapse. He stepped between us and the shifting mirrors, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. The room stirred, glass surfaces trembling, shadows writhing as though resisting him. Mark shouted, his voice raw with fear, while Rachel buried her face against my shoulder. The man raised his hand, not with force but with a steady quietness, and the mirrors groaned under an unseen strain. One by one, the false reflections faltered, their movements collapsing until only our true images remained, shaken but still. The door opened on its own then, swinging wide to reveal the library's dim corridor. We rushed out, Rachel pulling me, Mark stumbling behind. I turned at the threshold, and the man still stood there, watching the mirrors settle back into silence. His gaze met mine briefly, filled with warning but also a strange gentleness, and then the door closed as if he'd never been. Outside, the three of us sat on the library steps, too shaken to speak. Mark's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette he didn't even smoke. Rachel pressed her palms against her eyes, and I stared at the ground, my heart still racing. I wanted to believe it was over, that leaving the room meant leaving the horror behind, but deep down, I knew it had followed us. I could feel it in the way the shadows lengthened even under the afternoon sun, stretching too far, reaching too close. That night, lying in bed, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. It lingered a second too long before moving with me, and I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders. I thought of the man, his presence steady like an anchor, but also of his silence. He hadn't promised safety, only given us another chance to breathe. And as the room cooled around me, I realized chances don't last forever. I used to walk home late without thinking twice, cutting through quiet streets where porch lights glowed faintly and dogs barked from behind fences. It felt safe in that ordinary way small towns usually do. Until the night I noticed the silence following me was heavier than my own footsteps. The world seemed to pause between breaths, and every shadow on the pavement felt deliberate. Rachel was the first to notice I had been restless. She teased me about my sleepless nights, but I couldn't explain how I woke up gasping, convinced someone had been standing at the foot of my bed. Mark brushed it off, insisting stress was making me paranoid, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. I wanted to believe them both, but the unease clung to me, stubborn as smoke. It happened again after class when we stopped by the abandoned community hall. The place had been boarded up for years, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with dust. Mark thought it would be fun to sneak inside. Rachel rolled her eyes but followed anyway. And I went along because pretending not to be afraid felt easier than admitting I was. The moment we stepped in, I regretted it. The air inside was cold and carried a faint hum, like whispers caught in the walls. The three of us wandered through empty rooms littered with broken chairs and faded posters. I tried to stay close, but something tugged at my attention, a sound like faint tapping in the distance. When I turned, a figure stood at the end of the corridor. It wasn't Mark or Rachel, though both were near me. The figure didn't move, didn't even breathe, just lingered long enough for my skin to prickle before it vanished into the dark. I froze, my throat tightening, but Rachel only laughed nervously when I told her. Mark frowned and said we should leave, but the hallway ahead stretched longer than it should have. No matter how many steps we took, the exit seemed to retreat farther, pulling us deeper into the building. My chest constricted, and I felt the ground tilt under my feet. The shadows bent around us, curling along the walls like they were alive. Rachel gripped my arm tightly, her face pale. Mark swore he saw someone brush past him, though there was no one there. We huddled close, hearts racing, when the air suddenly grew denser, pressing against our lungs. I heard faint laughter then, light and echoing, though not from any of us. Panic surged, and I stumbled backward into a cracked door that swung open behind me. Inside was a narrow stairwell leading down into blackness. That was when he appeared again. The man I had seen before, the one who always surfaced when fear reached its breaking point. He didn't speak, just stepped into view as though he had been waiting all along. His presence cut through the chaos, steady and unshaken, his gaze fixed on something beyond the shadows clawing toward us. Without lifting a hand or raising his voice, the tension in the air seemed to recoil, the laughter dimming into silence. Rachel pulled me forward, Mark following reluctantly, and somehow the corridor shortened, the exit door finally within reach. The moment we stumbled outside, the night air felt sharper, cleaner, though my legs nearly buckled from the rush of release. Behind us, the building loomed as if nothing had happened, its windows dull, its door sealed tight. I knew better, though. Something had seen us, touched us, and let us go. We sat in silence on the curb, too shaken to speak. Rachel's grip on my hand hadn't loosened. Mark stared blankly at the asphalt, and I just tried to steady my breathing. I thought about the man again, his calmness almost unnatural, but I felt a strange comfort in knowing he had been there. He didn't save us outright, but he gave us a way out when everything else closed in. That night, lying in the dark, I stared at the ceiling and listened for sounds I didn't want to hear. My chest still carried the echo of that pressure, and my eyes drifted to the corner of the room where shadows collected thicker than they should. I wanted to convince myself it was over, that leaving the hall meant leaving it all behind. But deep down, I knew. Once something chooses to notice you, it doesn't forget. And the thought of being remembered by what I saw filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. The night it all began was so ordinary, I almost laughed thinking back on it. I had gone with Rachel and Mark to a small gathering at a friend's house. Nothing wild, just music humming in the background and people talking too loudly in the kitchen. We left later than planned, the streets mostly empty, the air cooler than expected. And I remember thinking how the quiet felt heavier than usual, as if the whole town had gone to sleep at once. Rachel walked a few steps ahead, scrolling through her phone, while Mark kept pace with me. It should have been an easy walk back, but I noticed movement near the street lamps, the way the light bent slightly as if someone had passed just outside its glow. I brushed it off, told myself it was a trick of tired eyes, until I realized the same distortion kept following us block after block. My heart raced faster with every step, and I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't as alone as we thought. We cut through the old playground to save time, the one kids used years ago, but now stood rusting, swings swaying without wind. That's when I saw her. A woman in pale clothes standing on the other side of the fence, her face hidden in shadow, though there was no reason for it. Rachel called out, thinking she was lost, but the figure didn't move. Mark stiffened beside me, his jaw tight, and I felt my stomach twist. By the time I blinked, she was closer, impossibly so, and the air around us grew dense. Rachel's phone flickered and died in her hand, even though it had been fully charged. The slide behind us groaned as if weight pressed against it, though nothing was there. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. Mark reached for my arm, urging me forward. Yet the path out of the playground seemed longer than before, stretching unnaturally. Shadows bled across the ground, curling toward our feet like water spilling from an unseen source. I could hear a voice then, faint, almost melodic, weaving through my thoughts. It wasn't words I recognized, but it clawed at me, making my chest tighten. Rachel clung to my sleeve, her eyes wide with terror, whispering that she felt someone breathing just over her shoulder. I turned and saw nothing but air trembling, like heat above asphalt, except it was cold, piercingly so. I thought I might collapse right there until I saw him again. He emerged not from the dark, but as if the dark gave way to him. The same man who had appeared before, calm and unhurried, his gaze steady while mine darted everywhere. He didn't shout or gesture, but his presence alone seemed to push back against the suffocating weight around us. The shadows stilled, the voice in my head faltered, and the pale figure by the fence froze, as if bound by something beyond my understanding. Mark urged us toward the street, his grip firm on my wrist, while Rachel stumbled beside me, her breaths shallow. The path that had stretched impossibly long now felt normal again, the distance collapsing until the open road welcomed us back. The man didn't follow, didn't even glance at us, only held his ground as the figure dissolved into the night air. It was as if his very existence was enough to draw a line between what belonged here and what didn't. We didn't speak until we reached Rachel's porch. Mark sat down heavily on the steps, face pale, while Rachel muttered about never walking that way again. I stayed silent, too aware of the way my skin still prickled, the way my ears strained for sounds that weren't there. I kept thinking of the woman by the fence, how wrong her stillness felt, and how the man had stood unshaken while everything in me unraveled. That night, I lay awake, staring at the corner of my room, half expecting the pale figure to return, half hoping the man would. I told myself it was over, that the playground belonged to the past now, but I couldn't shake the feeling we had stepped into something waiting just beneath the surface. Once you've been seen, really seen, by whatever lives in